you can see the holes are offset. So you want to pay attention to that and try not to force it. It will be on there backwards at this point like this. You can see where it's against here and it's off the edge of the block. It actually has to go on like this. The 4 holes are offset slightly to one side for the oil pan to bolt on. So make sure you get it in the correct orientation, which would be like this, where it lays on the surfaces all the way around and the 4 holes go through. So we're going to put that like that. Take our oil pan here. So this will also only go on one direction. So you'll have to pay attention to that when you go to put it on. So the shallow side from this divot to here goes towards that. Try not to move our gasket around too much. Kind of line it up. Then we're going to have 4 pan bolts. These are 5/16 coarse thread bolts. They're just simple. I think they're about an inch long. These are actual factory ones. They have the round head or round cutout in the head. Take a 1/2 inch socket. These are going to go in there. I mean, you can see, well, I'll show you real quick what I was talking about earlier with some of these gaskets. I've had gaskets where the holes are slightly small and you have to cut them out, which you can use a piece of tubing and sharpen the end up and use it kind of like a die to cut them out. You can lay it on top of something that has the hole in it there possibly and use a ball peen hammer and very carefully cut it out. There's different ways to do it, but yeah, so anyways, that's how that goes. So I'm going to do this here to get it started. So I'm going to get all 4 of these started before we even tighten them down. So we want to make sure the gasket's sitting correctly. Now, even though it's sitting in the 4 holes over there, I just moved this gasket this way quite a bit to get this side to line up. So just to be cautious and make sure before you get carried away tightening things. So the 4 bolts that we used over here, by the way, were 1/4 20. So if you're missing bolts, you can use a 1/4 20 bolt. You just want to be paying attention to the length so that they don't protrude inside the crankcase too far and catch your crankshaft or anything like that. And I think these were about 1 inch or 3/4 long. So I'm going to just snug these up with my fingers so we can turn it over and work on it. Alright, we'll flip it over. So these are 1/2 inch bolts, or heads on them are for a 1/2 inch socket. Do the same thing again with my 1/4 inch drive ratchet. Just snug these up. Again, you want to go from, you really should go from opposite corners when you do this. Make sure that, like I said, nothing gets distorted the way it comes down. So start here, then go over to the back corner over here and snug that one. So you're going across in an X pattern between the 4 corners. Alright, now we got that far. Those bolts are going to need about 150 inch-pounds, I think is what I'm, yeah, about 150 inch-pounds for those. So we're going to, that's what it calls for to actually. So we're going to crank it up to about 158 again, 160. So we're gonna start here. Get the thing to quit turning on me. Alright, there's that one. We'll go over here on the other opposite corner so we do our X pattern. This is hard to hold on to because it's lightweight. Got that one. I'm gonna go back over here. There's that one. This one's going to be a little tricky because it's on an angle, but should be able to do it all right. And there's that one. So I'm just going to double check these real quick. All right, that gets those. So at that point, we're pretty much, crankcase is assembled. We got our piston, our valves, everything's put together there. At this point, I want to make sure I don't get any debris and stuff in my crankcase, so I'm going to drop in my oil filler hole here, dipstick plug. Just thread it in finger tight. Then we're going to do our breather assembly, which will be this little deal here that'll go in side of here. This has a little check valve that's sheet metal in here. You want to look at this too, make sure this is your packing that they use in there to help keep the oil. It works kind of like a filter to keep the oil coming out from the vent hole in this other cover that will go on the top. I'll show you in a minute. So this is your little check valve that goes in there. You can see this one's got some wear on it. This is going to do is it's a breather, so as your crankcase builds up any pressure, the pressure will be able to push this check valve forward, and then this will relieve to atmosphere through this little unit here. So this all has to go in there. You want to check these out too, because this little check valve thing sometimes can be fatigued and wore and it won't seal back against there like it's supposed to. This is supposed to spring down. It's a piece of spring steel. I've seen these in the past where I don't know if they've gotten super hot from years of use or wear or what, but they are bent away from the surface and actually do not seal the hole off, and they should basically work like a reed valve in a two-stroke and just go back and forth as crankcase pressure and vacuum goes back and forth. You basically are just relieving pressure in the crankcase, and you don't want to bring atmosphere back in technically. So that there, okay. This will be the cover actually cover that's going to go on the outside. This part goes to the inside of the engine. This is the outside part. This is the vent to atmosphere. This goes in behind this portion of it. This fits on here like this around your carburetor. So you want to make sure you get these oriented correctly. The other thing that really needs to be paid attention to is this portion, or this part here, has a tiny hole right here. This is the bottom side. This needs to face down. That's why I wrote top up here on this, to remind myself to check that, to make sure I have it oriented correctly when I insert this. So any oil vapor that comes in here through this check valve into this stops the vapor from trying to go out through this other plate into the atmosphere, and catches it. It works kind of like a catch can system. The oil vapor will collect in here, and instead of just pooling up and sitting there, that little tiny pinhole lets it drain back inside of here so it can go back into the engine, and that helps lubricate parts inside there also. So this requires a gasket out of this set. There's actually 2 gaskets to go with this one. So the 2 gaskets that we're going to require fit the perimeter of those 2 parts. And they're basically this right here. There's going to be identical ones. There's nothing different about the 2. All they do is sandwich each part together in there and seal it. So what we're going to do is have 2 of these. One goes on the back side of this. Actually, looks like they are going to fit super tight too. And let's see how these fit before I get too carried away, but if it's not laying down flat, it could be a problem and not seal. So I think it's going to be alright by the looks of it. This one I worry about more so than the others. This one has that small hole, and as you can see, the gasket is lifted a little bit. And it seems to be only these ends. So what I'm going to do is grab a utility knife blade, trim that a little. So what I'm going to do is go in the end of here and just ever so slightly take a little bit out of there. That's all we want. Just enough to let that gasket relax.